and sort of, a henchman for the Muslims. He went there to try to cajole them and say, don't resist, join us. And Pelagius resisted and he basically likens their little cave to the mustard seed in the parable of Christ, which grows into a great kingdom. Okay. And he said, from this tiny mustard seed, which you're mocking, we're going to come back. And they did.
What I would love for you to do, and one of the things that I think one of the places that I've been inspired was the story of the Reconquista in Spain, which is, if, hopefully you can do it a much, better description than I can, but it was this small pocket of Christians that were like, hey, if we don't rise up, it's over for us. We will be permanently conquered forever. And I just want, for you to share that story and that movement and the impact that it has, because what I want, young Christian men out there, or even young men who believe in the Western, the beauty of Western culture and its emergence, because it was directly correlated to Christendom, to give them something they can lean into. So would you talk about Spain a little bit for us?
Yeah, absolutely. And all you said, I agree with, there's, and maybe we'll get into it, but it's really a concerted effort to divorce modern day Christian men from their rich, robust, muscular heritage and convince them that if you want to be a good Christian, you have to be a doormat. And anything other than that is, you're an evil hypocrite. Okay. And that's its own very important topic, which at some point we can address. But as far as the Reconquista and the story that you're referring to, this is, I always say it, but, the famous saying, which is history is stranger than fiction. In this case, history is way more dramatic than fiction. And the story which I'll quickly summarize, this could be such a blockbuster movie, and they don't even have to exaggerate. They don't have to, the script is written and it's called the historical records and the chronicles.
Yeah, right.
But basically, as I was alluding earlier, in the year 711, the Muslims finally, having conquered all of North Africa, and now they're in Morocco or Mauritania. They now cross the straits, and they're in Spain, and they conquer it. And of course, Spain at this point is a Christian nation, ruled by the Visigoth, or the Western Goths, who are Christians. And they beat them, they destroy them, they oust them, and they essentially take over. Now, think of the peninsula of Spain. If you split, it looks like a square. If you split it in four, the northwestern, the top left, and not all of it, but just a very, very small northern portion, which is very rugged, mountainous, intemperate weather, not a great place. So most Christians were conquered and they became subjects of the Muslim invaders, as they became known, the Moors. And, but a very, very small pocket actually fled, a sort of resistance group, and lived in the mountains. And, depending on the sources, according to the Muslim sources, it was something like 12, Christians. One of them who became their king is Pelagius, or Peleo. And he's sort of, he's the founder essentially of the resistance movement against, the Muslim conquest of the Spains. So they're holed up literally in a cave. And according to al-Makari, who's one of the primary Muslim historians of this time, like I said, they're just a small group, and the Muslims tried to oust them, but it was just too difficult in that terrain. And they said, what are 10 or 12 Christians? Let them rot. And from that, and the Christians themselves, Pelagius. So at one point during the conflict, before they said, let them rot, they had a parley at the cave. And the man who parlayed with Pelagius was actually some bishop who had succumbed to Islamic rule and was now a dhimmi and sort of, a henchman for the Muslims. He went there to try to cajole them and say, don't resist, join us. And Pelagius resisted and he basically likens their little cave to the mustard seed in the parable of Christ, which grows into a great kingdom. Okay. And he said, from this tiny mustard seed, which you're mocking, we're going to come back. And they did, century after century. So from that small seed, you had a very few small, in the northwestern quadrant, again, Christian kingdoms developed. And, and the whole thing between them was war with the Muslims. And this is the Reconquista. And it starts slowly and slowly. They start moving southward and southward. But even before that, they were still in the cave and whatnot. The Muslims were waging and sending two annual campaigns according to, the Sharia. You have to go and devastate, and they would go and devastate and take as many slaves as they could and kill. So this is, I always called Spain as something of a microcosm of the perennial jihad between Christendom and Islam. It was all concentrated there. People often think of the Holy Land and the Crusades, and justifiably so. But really, if you look at Spain, it was all there in one encapsulated, closed off sort of, like I said, microcosm. So it was a continuous warfare, and it begins the Reconquista there. Depending on the dates, some actually say the real formal date is in 1085 when Toledo is conquered. Toledo is essentially right in the heart of Spain, and it was the old Visigothic capital. So when it was taken from the Muslims, this was a real watershed moment. And at any rate, it was the same thing, and they continued warring constantly. And, you get all these now savage, wild Berber Islamic fanatical groups that come from Africa who are essentially ISIS. They're actually described as dressed in black, and all you see is their eyes, and all they do is scream, Tawheed or jihadist slogans, essentially. And they come and they create mountains of heads, pyramids of Christian heads, and there's wars. And this goes on, so 711 is a conquest. Soon thereafter, you have the mountain, Pelagius, and the resistance begins. And basically this goes on until 1492. So we're talking over 700 years. All right. This is how long it took Spain to rid itself of invading Islam and all the depredations. Cordoba, which we hear of as this great, bastion of multiculturalism. Again, this is how the historians like to present it, or some of them anyway, was actually a massive slave emporium, for the entire Muslim world, because it was a base in Spain, in Europe, and they preferred fair-skinned slaves. So it was from that base that they would get northern, slaves from Spain and also from Europe, all throughout Europe. So that was much of its wealth, was the slave trade. Then anyway, and you fast forward all the way, like I said, to 1492, and Ferdinand and Elizabeth, Isabella, and then, and even then, that's not the end of it, because essentially Granada, the final bastion of Islam, their southern tip, is captured. And then the Muslims have uprisings, and for centuries, they're now pretending to be Christians and engaging in what's called taqiyya, but their heart's still with Islam, and we can get into that. But anyway, that is the story of its heroic resistance, self-sacrifice. I write about it a lot in both my books, because it is, like you said, one of the most pivotal moments. And it's one of those things, like I said, imagine you can make what a blockbuster movie that would be of just heroic resistance, but they will never do that, because the resistance is from Christians fighting Muslims who are conquering their lands. And those are all topics that nobody's wants to touch. If it was the opposite, if it was Christians terrorizing and killing Muslims, of course, that would be all over, and the Muslims could be presented as heroes. Yeah, that would be a major movie, but such as it is, it won't.